It's the lens, it's the lens, it's the lens, gotta live diverse. It's the lens, it's the lens, it's the lens, live diverse. You are listening to The Lens Living Diverse, a podcast brought to you by the CNIB advocacy team. Join Nisha, Vivi, and I as we speak to individuals with intersecting identities who live with sight loss as they share their unique stories. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of The Lens Living Diverse. I am one of your hosts, Ben, joined by my co-host, Vivi. Vivi, shout out to the listeners.
Hello, Lens listeners. Welcome back to another episode.
Okay, so we are going to talk about immigration with sight loss. So having those two identities. And Vivi, I want to ask you, can you imagine immigrating from a different country and then living with sight loss and coming over just on your own without family members?
I just think it would be something that would be very difficult as a person with sight loss and no family support. The prospect of moving is difficult enough, but moving like countries and maybe where you don't speak the language, that just sounds like, an overwhelming task, especially without the support of family and friends. So I admire anyone who has done it, anyone who's thinking of doing it, anyone who's in the process of doing it. It's a challenge, I think, for everybody, but I think there could be added components when you're doing it as a person with sight loss. So yeah, I'm really excited to hear about the experience of our guest today.
Of course, so definitely a cognitive load for sure. So, with that said, I am going to introduce our guest for today, none other than Lily. So, Lily, how are you doing today?
Hi, everyone. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and thank you for being here. So, we are going to start off this conversation by letting the listeners hear a little bit about you. So, if you could share a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so I am Lily. My legal name is actually Pei Wen, but I do go by Lily. I'm a researcher and I live in London, Ontario. I currently work at the Parkwood Hospital. One of my main research interests is actually the psychological well-being of individuals with sight loss and their families. I came to Canada from China as an 18-year-old in 2013 to pursue my undergraduate education, which brings up my first identity. I am an immigrant. I'm relatively new to Canada. I am a member of sight loss. I am legally blind myself. I'm a woman and I'm a member of ethnic minority group. In my case, I identify as Chinese. I also worked at the CNIB as an intern 2 years ago. So I have some experiences in the helping profession as well.
Thank you for sharing, Lily. And it seems like quite a journey in coming to Canada from China. So even with that said, how was that process as a person who does live with sight loss?
Overall, I would say though it's smoother than I anticipated, really. But I do remember, especially in my first 2 years of undergrad, I feel like I was almost like the only student who would be like running between the accessibility services and the international student centers at the beginning of each semester. So yeah, it's been interesting and it's pretty cool, really. Like even getting off the airplane and you're like in a completely different cultural and language environments and space. It's the fact that's like really cool. Like I was mostly fluent in English prior to coming here, but like still like the moment you get off the plane, ooh, it's just really cool just to hear, oh, everyone around you is speaking English now. Well, of course you anticipated that, but when it was happening in real time, ooh, yeah, it was quite amazing.
I think for me and maybe lots of people who travel to another country where, they don't speak the predominantly language that is spoken there, I think I for sure would feel like I stepped off the plane and onto another planet. So I really enjoy hearing the excitement in your voice saying that, when you stepped off the plane, you found it was really cool because I think that's probably a rare experience for newcomers to any country.
Thank you. I think part of it is like when you're 18, I guess things were more exciting when you're 18. Even though you have to navigate the different systems, like even like how to do tax returns, how to get your health card, stuff like that. And in my case, or in any person's case, someone with sight loss, just setting up accommodations, connecting yourself with the organization who would provide you the service that would help you adapt to your new environment. Thinking back, it was actually a lot of work, but like when you're 18, it's just okay, one thing at a time. I got this.
Yeah, and even what Vivi was making mention of the fact that that feeling of just your calmness, and you're like, yeah, so I just went to a different country, and this was the process. And what I think of is when I left to go to school in, I guess, a different town that was further away from my family. And I'm just thinking of that day where it was the first time I moved away from home. And I'm thinking to myself when I hear your story, because and you could elaborate on this a little later, where you were making mention that you didn't come with a family. You didn't come with your family.
No, it was just me. I think it's part of it's like your focus because I feel like when you are with your family, you feel like, okay, I can count on my parents. But when it's you, it's literally like, especially at the very, very beginning, it's just you. So I think that almost help you focus in an interesting way, if that makes sense.
You're drawing on what you're made of. Like you really find out, how resilient you are and how adaptable you are and how you function in certain situations. I can understand that because yeah, you only have yourself to rely on and problem solve and figure things out. So if you don't do it, who's going to do it, right? Like it's up to you now.
Yeah, because I even remember like when I was like talking to people back then, I didn't have that much of a problem. I didn't like really get nervous easily or anything. But for some reason, I think it might be a common experience when you first start making phone calls in a second language. Ooh, it was nerve-wracking, but you had to do it. Like I had to make those appointments with accessibility services or CNIB or like all the other places. Like it's just like okay, like it or not, now you have to do it.
Very good point. Very good point. It's almost accelerating that independence for sure. So you made mention about the language barriers. So actually, before we go into the language barriers, can you share with the listeners what language you speak? What's your first language?
My first language is Mandarin Chinese.
Mandarin Chinese. Yeah. So with that language barrier and then having sight loss on top of it, and I know you made mention that you learned English back in China as well.
Yeah.
Did you find that as any form of a barrier and then throwing that layer of sight loss in there?
Actually, yes. I feel like if there was any language barrier, it's just like it just made more prominent with silos. A good example I can give is like learning all the food names because I feel like no matter how fluent you are with the language before coming to a country with different culture and different kinds of food, there is nothing that will truly prepare you. Like all those food items that you were not exposed to in your home country, but like when you don't have silos, you probably can get away with as long as you can sound the words out and then you can see the picture on the menu. You learn those things pretty quickly.
Mm.
And for me, it was cool. Like I knew all the basic food names, but you know all the cool pasta name, all the spaghettis, linguinis, lasagna. Yeah, stuff that you wouldn't have often in East Asian countries. Okay, cool. Now you're in the cafeteria, like, I can barely see the menu. Like what I did, I would literally ask the server. So I still remember undergrad, there was a section in the food court that had the homemade food. So every day they have like different types of dishes. So I would literally ask them like, what do you guys have? And they would actually just tell me. And sometimes there would be like food that I had never heard of. It's like, okay, cool. I don't know what those look like or taste like yet, but I guess I'll just order and taste test. So it was a few months of me taste testing all those different kinds of food. It was interesting. And even like my friends, they have to like explain to me, like what's some kinds of food, like what they look like or might taste like before I order them. It's like good example I can think of back then was pierogies. Like one of my Asian friends was like, oh, it's basically like dumplings, but it's basically like potato and cheese inside and instead of meat and veggies. I was like, okay, I think I got it.
I will definitely let you know that you definitely gained something new in discovering pierogies, because pierogies are the BEST. You heard it first from everybody. Pierogies are amazing.
Exactly.
A Manitoba classic. Yep.
I love those.
So good, so good. We definitely have to, if we don't watch out, this might be a foodie episode. We're just like, oh,
Exactly.
you gotta try
Even
this.
like I remember first time I was in the subway line. It was yeah, I felt so bad for the person behind me. There was subways in China, but I just never bothered to went in. But yeah, like I had to literally ask the server like, what are the veggies out there? Like, can you tell me? And like they would tell me one by one. It was well, a test of my memory, but I did it. And I eventually just like memorized my order later on. But yeah, just stuff like that. Things that's like visual. Someone without sight loss, you can, oh, okay, I can see the picture and I can sound out the words, and you learn those things instantly. But for someone with sight loss, it's literally trials and errors. And to me, it's almost interesting. Like I do consider myself as someone who's relatively linguistic, and there's some stereotypes that's like, well, people with sight loss, if you cannot hear, if you cannot see, you must be able to like hear it very well. Meaning like you would learn language pretty quickly. I think, well, to some extent that might be true, but like when it comes to language learning, we probably like encounter some unique barriers that like you don't really recognize till you encounter them yourself.
Yeah, I never thought of it that way. The thing that I was thinking of as you were speaking was, everybody says that food is the universal language, but if you don't have access to the names or a sense of what they look like how can food be universal? It usually connects us, but the example you gave, Lily, was somewhat of a barrier until you kind of were acquainted with the food items and got a sense of what they were made of and what they looked like and how they were spelled. So it's just interesting to think of it from that sight loss perspective of, someone coming to a different country and not really having a concept of what some of the foods are.
Exactly.
And how that can be a barrier, and then how that can be a point of connection, right? Because you're saying now you love pierogies.
Okay, so even we're gonna revisit your experiences of living in China, and something that we would love to know is the accessibility. So what's the difference between the accessibility in China compared to here in Canada?
There are actually quite some differences. I would say in China, accessibility and inclusive education, well, they are at their early stage. They have started, I feel like, in the probably 80s, 90s. One thing that's actually cool was actually in the province where I lived, They started the resource center for children with visual impairments, like within the province. And I was literally one of the kids who received the support in the first year when they first opened. So in a way, I was lucky. They would they would do assessments with each kid, and in my case, I was provided with a monocular that I would actually like be able to at least see some of the stuff that's written on the blackboard when I was sitting in class. But overall, like I would say, when you look at the big picture, most of children with sight loss would go to the boarding school for children with visual impairments. So the teachers working there, they would be trained specifically to work with individuals with sight loss. So they are professionally trained. But I don't think the special education training was great, at least when I was going to school, like with the teachers teaching in mainstream school. So there was also no EAs, education assistants, sitting with the kids when they were younger. So it's really a lot on the students and a lot on the teachers and a lot on the parents, you can say, if you are attending the mainstream school. Especially when you're talking about like some of the class sizes, it could be like 40 plus kids. But yeah, another thing that stood out was probably like it's not like people would fear individuals with sight loss per se, but in general, the expectations placed on them would be like a lot lower than like what you would have in Canada. I think in Canada, it's still true to some extent. Like people either consciously or subconsciously would have lowered expectations for individuals with sight loss, but it's probably more so in China, like the lowered expectation and pity. I think overall, I had pretty good luck with teachers. Maybe, yeah, they thought they were like I was doing fine. So they generally held me according to the same standard as other students, and they were aware that I have sight loss. So like I would say like in this sense, I was pretty lucky in that sense, because especially like when I was going to school. Now they have more students attending mainstream school now, definitely. But well, back in my days, I would say it was a rare occurrence to see someone with sight loss in the mainstream class. Another thing that's actually super interesting is this is actually not just in China and some Asian countries. When talking about people with sight loss, people would immediately think like people I'm talking about, an average person who might not have that much knowledge about the sight loss community. They would think like in terms of employment prospect, the only career option for a person with sight loss is becoming a massage therapist, which in no way is to say, oh, like massage therapist is a bad job, because it's not at all. It's more about the options and opportunities that you have, like where you can see yourself be, like when you grow up as a kid. Luckily, like I don't think my parents ever instilled that belief in me, like when you grow up, you can only do this. So I guess not sure if they will be listening, but shout out to them, like for like, believing in me, and they believe their daughter did deserve more options, and like she had the potential to achieve more and to like do what she wants to do when she grow up, in that sense.
I just think it's interesting. You talk about the different expectations for people with sight loss, and we think in Canada, maybe, we're a little bit more progressive in our way of thinking, but you're pointing out, Lily, that, yeah, perhaps not, because it seems that across the world, the expectations with people for people with the lived experience of sight loss are low, and people are at a loss about what the opportunities could be. And I was just thinking to myself, the option to be a massage therapist, I think that career path is proposed to people still with sight loss as a viable profession. And again, to agree with you, not to say that there's anything wrong with that, but if you aspire to something other than that, and if you have the support around you that encourages you to aspire to do what you want to do and not necessarily what society thinks is an option for you, I think that's great. And it's interesting, the discussion about the education system, about how you also had access to specialized teachers and training, and then the difference between the mainstream, because I think also that's like a discussion or a thought that goes on about whether, kids with sight loss need to have specialized training in an institution devoted to that, or if they should be mainstreamed. I mean, I can only speak to my experience. Like, I was mainstreamed all through my education. And so, I mean, I think it was beneficial for me, but I can understand why there would be support and an argument for, classes and schools that are solely devoted to students with sight loss. But it's hard to say. I think it probably depends on the family situation and what's best for the child. And, you don't know until you're in that situation. So, I mean, I'm grateful for my education.
Definitely, I love the shout out to your parents, and I want to shout out Lily's parents as well, because you definitely motivating her to not just saddle herself with something. Not that we're all saying massage therapist is perfectly fine, but it's about selection, and you don't want to saddle people with certain professions or their abilities. So thank you for mentioning that. So a question I really wanted to highlight during the lens, because this is how we actually met initially, Lily, on me in my advocacy role, and you being a top-notch advocate after hearing your story about a housing issue that you went through. And I wanted to bring that up today because I want the listeners to hear about your housing issue and how you found a solution to it. And I also want to know your different identities. Did that make it harder to kind of navigate through that housing issue and not having your parents here and being new to the country?
Sure. So, I lived in a rental apartment unit on the first floor, when it happened. So it was March this year. Long story short, it was a sewage backup situation that happened to my apartment unit. And eventually it led to a flood, partly because of the building staff negligence. And essentially, I had to evacuate because the apartment unit was deemed as uninhabitable. And initially, the rental company actually refused to provide accommodation, like in terms of living arrangement, yeah. And they also refused to compensate for any damage to my personal belongings that was caused by the flood. So I had to do a lot of research, like reading up the laws and regulations on accessibilities in Ontario and housing. I think my little bit training in undergrad in disability studies actually helped. And I also had to utilize my support network, in this case, mostly my friends, to talk and negotiate with the representative from the rental company and advocate myself. It's just what my needs are and what my rights are, and doing some research to just email some law professionals, not necessarily to take them to court, but to seek some legal advice, what I'm entitled to and what I'm not entitled to. And eventually, I would say a satisfactory resolution was reached 2 months later. In terms of my identity, and its influence, I felt like it probably played a role. First of all, like I wouldn't like wanna appear vulnerable in the sense that I don't have family around, which like that's the part I did not disclose to them. But I feel like when those representatives they are talking to a woman, talking to a person with sight loss, talking to an immigrant, they're probably more likely to test your limits per se, because stereotypically, well, if someone's relatively new to the country, they might not know the laws as well, know their rights, what their rights are as well. But like, too bad because I've been renting since I was an undergrad because like I couldn't live in my parents' basement. So I probably knew about the regulations and laws more than like my peers would do, like on average. So yeah, I think when you have sight loss too, like consciously or subconsciously, there's that assumption that you are almost like cognitively incapable. So but too bad. I was like literally had to like deliver the laws to them. But I felt like yeah, they're more likely to test you that way, like thinking they can get away with things. But like for me, it's just to like stay calm and stay assertive and also like stay civil. Just like I would say, like stay and like let them know that you are actually informed. You are not like demanding something that you're not actually entitled to.
You bring up a really good point. You bring up the vulnerabilities. And you have here the vulnerability, and these are the stereotypical vulnerabilities because I'm a firm believer that just because you live with sight loss doesn't necessarily exactly mean you're vulnerable just because you're a woman or an immigrant, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the stereotypical vulnerabilities that you have people addressing, and I really like the point that you brought, where when you go against landlords or these big companies or organizations or employers, it's that mindset that they have of here's one, being someone with a disability, here's two, being a woman, and here's three, being someone from a different country. And as soon as they hear that accent, it's like, oh, well, they don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why every time I hear your story, not that it's just about you being a person with a disability or a woman or an immigrant, because you definitely have other amazing characteristics and traits. But when I do hear your story being in advocacy, how you pretty much fought the system and you were very resourceful. So I really commend that, especially coming from the advocacy field. And I want to pass this on to Vivi as well, having kind of those vulnerabilities as well, multiple vulnerabilities.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that like this is where, we have discussions about intersectionality. And so this is where your intersectionality influences the perception of how you engage with the world, right? Like that's
Mm-hmm.
what we talk about with intersectionality. So it's not only the qualities that make up who you are as a multifaceted person, but again, how those qualities are interpreted or engaged with when you are dealing with other people in the world or the environment. And so Lily, like you just so eloquently stated, right? You identified, every aspect to who you are as a person and your awareness of how that could be perceived by essentially people who have the power to make decisions or essentially have authority in this situation. And you kind of flip the script on them and school them.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just thinking that, like, you have this advocate alter ego, right? Like you may think this because of what you see, hear, and are experiencing of me visually or, in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
But little do you know,
Mm-hmm.
there's more to me. I have more knowledge than maybe you do in this situation. So like, yeah, that's a perfect example of, uh, you know, being aware of who we are in terms of all of our identities and then how that is interpreted by the world around us, and just being cognizant of all of that.
Thank you. I think some of those qualities might be like built gradually, like as I grew up, because just growing up as the only kid in school with sight loss and just having to be resourceful, and I was resourceful. I think eventually, like that does build up your confidence. I think for the most part, I passed that stage of like, oh, you think I can't do this, and I'll prove it to you I can. Like mostly like in ordinary situation, I passed that stage. Like I do this because this is what I want. But like I think those qualities are still there when it comes to advocacy. It's like I think I do have that confidence. Of course, I need to do the homework on my end, but it's like, yeah, I will actually do my homework and let you know, like I know what I'm doing, that kind of thing, and just being resourceful. Because you have to. When I was younger, maybe yeah, I mentioned that I have monocular, but I wouldn't say like my accommodation in terms of like either like from the school system or from like just the assistive technologies that I have were adequate. So like I had to come up with ways to just alternative ways to do stuff like borrowing notes from your friends after class to catch up, stuff like that. And even like as an immigrant, because like especially at the very beginning, it's just me. So like, okay, when it comes time to moving, what do you do? Like, well, okay, you just have to be resourceful. Like when you're like a midterm is coming up, but like your accommodation plan was still being setting up because like first year I had to like do those things very last minute. Like what do you do? Like you just have to be like resourceful.
It's something that I even just realized and during this conversation is the vulnerabilities, the perceived vulnerabilities that you just mentioned, you just flipped it and you flipped it into resourcefulness and adaptability.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Yeah, like it's like you cultivated this innovative way of just negotiating these barriers like all through your life because you had no other choice, right? Like your choice, you came to Canada, so here you are. You've got to rely on yourself. So it seems like that is just part of your core personality. You've been doing it ever since, you were young because you had to, because there was no other choice. And I mean, I think that's a great example, right? Of what we are capable of when we have no other choice but to, draw on the abilities that we have.
So even something you mentioned, research, the big R word, and in previous episode, we had Dr. Mahadio Sukai, and we were speaking about the importance of like research within diverse communities and how you could find outcomes and you could find results from really looking at diverse communities. So something that I would love to ask you with your researching background, do you find that some of your own intersecting identities are seen within your research, or do you have a goal as well to show these identities?
That's a great question. I think my identities definitely shaped my research. First of all, I'm a member of the sight loss community. I think my own experience with sight loss has drawn me into the vision loss research in general, especially the psychological aspect. And speaking of the psychological aspect, I think about it, I almost feel like just the emphasis on introspection in the Asian culture probably has some sort of influence. But I do remember like having an interest in like psychology and biology when I was pretty young. But I do feel like the emphasis on introspection in the Asian culture probably like just highlighted that, reinforced that. And yeah, and I feel like with my cultural background, cross-cultural background, I do have a pretty good cultural awareness and sensitivity in my work. Although, like I would say, most of my work has been done with predominantly white sample, but like a lot of it was because of time constraint of typical research projects. But yeah, even I felt like when I was defending my thesis, I did get asked about some questions about cultural implications, and I felt like I could answer those pretty well with a lot of nuance.
Thank you for sharing that, and I definitely in the future, if you have any research, I am the guinea pig that you could test on.
Oh, that's good to know. Also, I wanted to add that I felt like representativeness is important, not just in research, but like in every field. Like even seeing Dr. Mahathir Sukai, what he's doing is really inspiring to me as a young researcher. Also, like given my brief experience in the helping profession and potentially going into the helping profession as a career path in the future. Like a lot of times, like I see what my colleagues at the CNIB, like what you guys have been doing. I feel like representation does matter, like in every field. Like for me, I think in the research community, just not just like for me, I feel like just for individuals with sight loss and who are people of color, I think it's good that we have more voices from like people like us added in, and it would be beneficial to the scientific community as well.
Of course.
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely.
Of course, and it creates that depth for sure. It creates that depth of not just looking at just one single identity, right? And I feel like this is why we're here in the podcast and having that conversation with Dr. Mahathir Sukai, and then having a conversation with you as well, and the great work that you're putting forth in terms of research. And I know in my grad school experience, we had to do research as well. And all I could say is I'm not a research type person, so I'm going to definitely leave it to you folks. But it's so important. I think it's so important to understand the different demographics that we come across, and with service delivery that we all are passionate to put forth for sure.
Yeah, because that's Canada, right? Like Canada is just not one identity. It's many people living here, you know, with their own ethnicities, ancestries, and diverse backgrounds. And that's what makes, you know, Canada the great place it is.
Of course, hands down. So it seems like we are coming to the end, and I hate it. I really hated the fact that we are coming to the end, because Lily, I could definitely listen to your stories all day and your experience, because I feel like it's phenomenal. I'm going to ask you the last question, and I'm wondering for individuals who, and I won't say exactly your identities because everybody's different, but for individuals in similar situations or similar identities, such as individuals coming from a different country, English as a second language, coming without family, what advice would you provide? And I know you may mention earlier about being adaptable, but what else?
A few things, I guess. I think first of all, believe in yourself. I'm not the type of person who say, "Well, as long as you believe you can do it." That sounds like yeah, motivational speech. That's just a little bit far from truth, because you still have to do all the work in between. But to me, if you don't even believe that you can do it, you wouldn't even think towards that direction. You wouldn't even work towards that goal. So yeah, believe yourself is important. There will be people around you with the best intention. They might tell you otherwise. Your inner voice sometimes will tell you otherwise. But believe in yourself, like what you want to do and what you can achieve. Also, perseverance is important because you will encounter obstacles, especially when you're taking a path that maybe not many people have tried before, whether it's going to a field that's not like traditionally known to be popular within the sight loss community, or moving to another country, something that maybe not many people have done. Perseverance is important, and just it's okay to um it's okay to like not stay positive all the time. We are all human. Like you don't have to be that perfect disciplined person all the time. It's okay to be vulnerable sometimes. Allow yourself that space. But overall, perseverance is important. And also, I think one last thing is reach out for help, because no one really, like sight loss or not, regardless, you cannot succeed on your own. Like make friends, make connections. Like more often than not, people are more willing to help, and I think that's how we succeed. We help each other, and yeah, hopefully, yeah, that someone who's listening would find some of the advice helpful.
Such great advice and well said, and you're a go-getter for sure.
Thank you.
You're
Yep.
definitely a go-getter.
Yep, absolutely.
Of course. So, as I made mention, we're running out of time. Lily, it was such a pleasure having you on the Lens Living Diverse. We'll definitely, me, you, Vivi, will definitely have a virtual pierogies lunch.
Yes.
Yes.
Come to Manitoba. We make them great here.
And I saw in your bio early on that you're into bubble tea, so we'll have that on the side for sure.
Yes, please.
Excellent. So once again, Lily, thank you for coming on the Lens Living Diverse and letting the listeners know about your experience.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure talking with you both.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Lily. It was a really fascinating discussion.
Of course. So thank you everybody for listening to the Lens Living Diverse. What an amazing episode from, like I said, a go-getter for sure, and just a wealth of knowledge. If you like today's episode, along with our other episodes, don't be afraid to subscribe to our many platforms. Also, if you want to know a little bit more about diversity and inclusion, you're more than welcome to visit the CNIB webpage, where you go to advocate, and then you will see We Are CNIB. Click on that, and then we have a whole page, whole wealth of diversity and inclusion resources. And last but not least, if you're interested or you have any feedback that you want to give to the Lens Living Diverse, please email advocacy@cnib.ca. Once again, advocacy@cnib.ca. So that's a wrap. Another episode of Lens Living Diverse. I was one of your hosts, Ben, along with my co-host, Vivi.
Bye for now, Lens listeners.
Peace.